Back from recess. We are resuming now with Bill number 248-37 COR. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
This is Masi, Madam Speaker. I move to set aside Bill 248-37.
There's a motion to set aside Bill 248. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, that motion carries. We are now on Bill number 250-37 LS. Senator Duenas, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Chair. At this time, I would like to move Bill number 250-37 LS as substituted by the Committee on Public Safety, Education, and the Arts. It is introduced by myself, Christopher M. Duenas, co-sponsored by Chris Barnett, Frank Bloss Jr., Thomas J. Fisher, Dwayne T.D. St. Nicholas, and Jesse A. Lujan. It is an act to add a new Chapter 94, Title 9, Guam Code Annotated, relative to establishing and codifying a multi-agency unified law enforcement group known in this act as MAULIC for the purposes of suppressing the importation, distribution, and selling of narcotics and illicit drugs on Guam. In the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss it.
Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, as all of us in this body know, and I want to say that many as this body, all in this body, I know are committed to fighting the scourge, particularly of methamphetamine and opioids, and the drug epidemic that we have on our island of Guam. Madam Speaker, I want to start by thanking Chief Stephen Ignacio and the Post Executive Director John Lizama for all the work that they've done on this legislation since its introduction. I also want to thank the committee for all the work that they've done. There were substantial changes to the bill, Madam Chair, and that's why it took us a while to incorporate the recommendations by the Chief and the Post Commission and others that got together to help us. And we took everything in consideration in the that was presented during the public hearing on this bill and incorporated the deletions and a couple of additions to the bill. I'm basically going to go through the real salient points of the bill, Madam Speaker, and those are actually going to enumerate some of the changes as well that were put into the bill as we go along, and I've basically have a copy of the markup in case there's any questions. First of all, Madam Speaker, the bill itself, in the title, demonstrates what we're trying to do and attempting to do here, Madam Speaker. The bottom line is that we need a stronger effort to combat the amount, the volume of illicit drugs, particularly methamphetamine and opioids, that are just proliferating in our community. Madam Speaker, many individuals through many administrations who have fought the war on drugs and drug epidemics over the years have said and see the current state that Guam is in as the worst it's ever been in terms of volume of methamphetamine on our streets. In the waning days of the Calvo administration, actually to the middle and to the waning days of the Calvo administration, it was known on the streets that a gram of methamphetamine would go for anywhere between $800 to $1,000. Madam Speaker, at this time, many will tell you that know what's going on the streets, that you can more than likely today in so many places on Guam go out and purchase a gram of methamphetamine for as low as $50. Madam Speaker, as I did the research on what's going on nationwide also with a national drug epidemic in the United States of America, one of the greatest points that the research bears out, particularly in high-density areas like the cities, large cities in the states, is that the volume of drugs is actually now what's creating a lot of the addiction. The simple volume that exists lends itself where people are able to get a hold of these highly addictive substances and become addicted quickly. And for most people, it's a death sentence. The reason for this bill, Madam Speaker, and what the title enumerates, basically suppressing the importation and distribution and selling of narcotics and illicit drugs on Guam, essentially is at the core of what has to be done. Madam Speaker, if we do not stop the volume of methamphetamine and opioids coming into Guam, we could soon lose our island. That is not an overstatement. That's the truth. And I know many of us in here have seen and felt, even in our own families, the scourge of this epidemic and what it's doing to our island. We have to do something at a greater pace and a greater rate to interdict, to stop the massive volumes of methamphetamine and opioids coming into Guam so that we can start helping our people heal and seek treatment for their addiction. Madam Speaker, one thing that I can say in our research that, first of all, the Chief of Police appreciated, and this is demonstrated under the authority and duration of Maulik. What sets forth the trigger for this task force that is now going to be codified in law is the fact that on Guam, we should have up to 520 personnel, officers on the beat, on the street at all times. Right now, Madam Speaker, as we are sitting here today, we'll be fortunate to possibly have 225, maybe 240 officers, not including those who are doing the administrative work and all the other operations of the police department, but actually officers to be in precincts, to be in cars, to be on shift, to be fighting against this scourge as well as providing for public safety. Madam Speaker, this bill will once and for all say that the people of Guam and the safety of the people of Guam deserve a minimum of a 70% manpower strong officer on the beat, officer on the street. Otherwise, this bill becomes activated. This task force becomes activated. It becomes mandatory. It's law, Madam Speaker, if this bill passes. That would represent a minimum manpower requirement of 364 officers. That more than likely would be 100 to 120 more officers than we currently have serving our public right now, Madam Speaker. Now I want to say I know many senators and yourself and others over past legislatures have tried their best to deal with the manpower issues within GPD, and there's a lot of efforts right now, even by our chairman. A lot of the efforts have been put into pay raises, to trying to maintain our officers and stop losing them to the federal government, but we're still losing that battle, Madam Speaker. So we need to step it up, and we need to make sure it's in law so that we fight harder to get to that number. But in the meantime, there are opportunities. And the opportunities exist basically, Madam Speaker, by making sure that when this manpower requirement is not met, it immediately makes sure that this mandatory task force is activated. Now, Madam Speaker, there have been efforts in this area before, and there have been some questionable practices that have been discussed. So one of the things that this bill does in terms of addressing some of those issues and possibilities is it makes sure that the chairman is the chief of police of this task force. But this chairman also has two co-chairmen, and that is the Post Commission as well as the Fusion Center, which brings the federal component along as well. Madam Speaker, it's also enumerated in oversight and coordination that the federal partners, once again, are recognizing the augmentation of sworn officers and the activation thereof when the chairman sits to set this up, brings all of those individuals and those entities together to be able to address this issue, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one of the things that our chief of police said during the public hearing on this bill, which we have now full support from all law enforcement officers, is what he realized is important now to codify in law a mandatory task force. And he realized, and his men and women in blue and others around law enforcement entities realized, that for the longest time, and even today more than likely, Madam Speaker, we have 7 to 8 of our own men and women in blue detailed to federal task forces for interdiction. The difference is, Madam Speaker, and I don't judge on what determinations are made at the federal level, but they make those decisions on when they move, on when they interdict, on when they do their operations. Our officers support that from the local side. And the chief of police said they came to the realization that one of the unique facets of this is now we have basically a codified force that is the equivalent of the federal side. Meaning when they go out there and start finding and getting information from the streets, they can go and do their interdiction by even recalling their officers from the federal side and maybe giving federal support on the other side of the wall when it comes to the implementation of federal and local laws. And so along with that, once again, Madam Speaker, becomes the need for the sworn officers. And this was one of the concerns, once again, that have been brought up in the past and that is addressed in this bill. The two functions that are addressed in this bill very well, Madam Speaker, and the Post Commission made sure that they will be in charge of ensuring that, first of all, the chief of police will be deputizing those officers that all of the other entities identify. Whatever the airport police, whatever other operations port police, whatever other DOC, whatever officers are available to be detailed to this Malik task force will be deputized by the chief of police. And then they will ensure that there's a training program for them that they are, as deputized and sworn, able to conduct out all of the operations that an officer would be conducting in order to do these operations. Madam Speaker, as I close on my opening comments of the bill, this is not a magic bullet. It is not going to solve all of our problems, but it is going to once and for all codify these 3 things, Madam Speaker. A drug task force for the introduction of illicit drugs that is a mandate by the people of Guam. It is a law. It is not at whim. It is not at the behest of a judgment call. If we cannot maintain the minimum manpower requirements, we must augment that operation. The other thing is, once again, Madam Speaker, once and for all, we're speaking loudly that minimum manpower requirements for our people of Guam to provide safety and security and the ability to interdict and to stamp out the rampant drugs that are poisoning our people and our island is codified in law. This bill also recognizes and reiterates that the governor of Guam will always have the power, of course, over all matters with regard to public safety as enumerated in the Organic Act. But that it is the boots on the ground, the chiefs, the operation throughout our entire public safety family and divisions that will take the lead and take the fight against illicit drugs. Madam Speaker, once again, it also ensures that deputization to make sure that we follow the law and that training takes place before any of these officers start to conduct operations. Madam Speaker, it is also identified in this bill that was identified during the public hearing that this is not going to be able to be accomplished without a funding source. This bill does not have a funding source, and the reason why is it calls for in the bill that upon convening the first meeting of Maulik, they will determine what the financial needs are and submit that to the legislature and submit that, of course, I'm sure, to the governor for a request of a budgetary allotment. So with that, Madam Speaker, I look forward to listening to the debate on this, and I look forward to hopefully getting the support of all of our colleagues to do whatever we can to fight the good fight against the massive importation and distribution of narcotics, opioids, methamphetamines, and now fentanyl, as you know, Madam Speaker, into Guam. Suzus Masi, I look forward to the debate on 250-37. Suzus Masi.
Suzus Masi, Senator. On the bill, my speaker, you are recognized.
Suzus Masi, Madam Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and rise in support of this bill number 250-37, because I truly believe, Madam Speaker, that it will marshal resources in order to combat illegal drug use, distribution, and importation. Madam Speaker, as we all have seen, and as far too many residents have experienced firsthand, drugs like meth and fentanyl continue to destroy the livelihoods. It continues to break families apart. And literally, Madam Speaker, it continues to cost lives. We as servant leaders must keep trying to combat the drugs that are plaguing our island. But Madam Speaker, make no mistake that during this legislative term, the 37th Guam Legislature, we have, as an august body, we have sent a clear message to criminals who prey on the vulnerable. Your crimes are unacceptable and will be met with harsher punishment. In fact, Madam Speaker, I want to note to my colleagues in the listening audience that, in fact, this year alone, we have enacted tougher penalties and stricter sentencing for violating tobacco laws, dealing with meth and fentanyl, molesting or raping children, the financial exploitation of elders, and substantial littering. So, Madam Speaker, Bill number 250-37 is yet another brick in the wall of protections as we as lawmakers have built for our people. As the measure rightly states, this new law enforcement group will create a pool of resources capable of providing support and expertise that allow for the identifying of perpetrators, detecting and disrupting the efforts to import, distribute, and the sale of narcotics and illicit drugs here in our island of Guam, Madam Speaker. I do want to note for the record that a fiscal impact was estimated by the Bureau of Budget and Management Research of more than $500,000 a year. And I want to say that I want to commit to working with the good author of Bill 250-37 to secure the funding necessary to accomplish the vision of this Maulik task force in the next term. And everybody knows that the word Maulik means to do good. I want to say that I did have an inquiry before the good author spoke and answered some of the questions that I had, and one that came to mind to me was that the version that was reported out, they had removed the members of Malik, including like the director of behavioral health and public health, DOC, DYA, and all that. But if I'm not mistaken, he noted that it was the chief, and maybe just for clarification, that the chief of police will be the one to look at all these folks and would be able to deputize that. So if the good author would yield, just for clarification, to make sure that in this attempt moving forward that representation or that support of interagency support from the government will be there. I hope he will
Would
help
the
me here.
sponsor yield to that question?
Yes, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the good Vice Speaker for pointing that out. In the markup version, and as you would see in the committee report, the Post Commission and the Chief of Police and others came in, and that while they recognized that it was a wonderful effort, and I actually reached out to a lot of, when I was drafting this bill, I worked with a lot of the individuals involved in recovery. They met in my office and we discussed the fact that they first didn't really realize, they thought that this was a go out and bag them and tag them and effort. But I told them, no, this is going after the big guys. This is going to start to try to create a choke point to methamphetamine and illicit drugs that are coming into Guam. But they said, they agreed with the fact that there are so many addicts out there right now and so many people addicted that what are we going to do when we start, you're still going to, man on the, officer on the beat, officer on the street is going to start, pulling in a lot of individuals that need treatment. And so they recommended that what we do in the bill, and we did that, was that this task force will be the one to be bringing in the treatment component and to be working with behavioral health and other public health entities to be able to work with them closely. But the problem with putting them on the actual task force itself is they were concerned that they would get bogged down, and the meeting requirements for this task force, they would be bogged down in not doing the law enforcement side of what they needed to do. And so that's why they made the recommendation that the committee was too large. It would become voluminous to be able to deal with what the actual bill calls for, which is the interdiction of drugs, and to set up these tasks, these efforts to be able to move law enforcement. And so, but it is a component of the bill to where they, as needed, bring in the treatment component to work in concert with them in order to be able to assist. But the decision was from all of the different entities that they were concerned that they wouldn't be able to do and work with the type of alacrity and flexibility to do what they needed if the board was too large and they had situations where they were voting on measures or making decisions, with the task force itself. And so that's why we did delete it, but we did have the component remain that they would be the arm to work with the treatment side of the House. I hope that answers the questions of the good Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to the good author of this legislation for sharing that answer to us so that the listening audience has a better understanding of why we're facilitating this legislation in this specific way. And I want to say thank you to him for doing this. I know that he has quite a number of sponsors on this measure, and I hope that there could be kind consideration for me on this. But I think that this is a really good bill. And like I said earlier, a lot of our colleagues in here, Madam Speaker, have really taken the time to step up on both sides of the aisle to literally protect the island as a whole, as I said earlier, right? Even our Manamco. So, and as we look at this, literally, like I said, drugs that are plaguing our island, especially with crystal meth and fentanyl, something that we should have never had here. It's happening to our beautiful island, and we have to be able to step up to the plate and show that we're we're not going to let this continue to happen. We're doing something about it, and this is the way of doing it. So thank you again, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to rise and speak in support of this measure. And undangko na si Diyos masi. Sana masi.
Salamasi. On the bill, is there anyone else who would like to speak on the bill? Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of the bill. I want to congratulate and thank the main sponsor to the piece of legislation. He'd spoken about this from quite some time to be able to get this project off the ground and for it to come to fruition in the form of a bill for discussion and deliberation of the body. You know, Madam Speaker, I started my career in law enforcement. Okay, not only was I patrol officer, but I was then a homicide investigator, and then a drug agent. And then ended my law enforcement career as a field supervisor, group supervisor for the Drug Enforcement Administration Task Force and for the Operations Sergeant / Commander of the Special Investigations Section of the Guam Police Department. At a time when our police department had over 500 officers. You know, at the time that when I was commanding the drug unit of the Guam Police Department, I even joked about it with my personnel. Because at that time, there was at one point in time, I had a medical episode, and unfortunately, you know, they found 24 stones in my gallstones. At that time, I was commanding the group. You know how many agents I had in my group? 24. So I named each stone after each agent that I had in my group. Because gallstones normally come from stress. So I blamed them all for that. But the significance, the importance of that is we had 24 in the local group, just within the Guam Police Department. The last time I checked with the SIS is still in existence with the Guam Police Department. I think they had 4. At the time we had, of course, we had, again, over 500 officers in the police department, and now we're down to less than 220. I don't think we even have 500 employees in the Guam Police Department right now. And we have a scourge that's plaguing our island right now in the form of drug use. You know, almost every day, you can open up the newspaper or read news reports on Guam, and every day you're going to find not just one, maybe 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 different articles of drug-related activity. It's scorned our island so much so that it's becoming more than the norm than the exception. When I was commanding the drug unit, the gram of methamphetamine was selling for about $1,500 a gram. Today, you can get it for as low as $20, but the average is about $50 a gram. That's telling you that's a lot of drugs on the street. The seizures, when the seizures are made, are in basically the pounds, not the grams or the ounces, but the pounds. What I appreciate about this task force, or the formation of this group, is it codifies the need for this task force with trigger points obviously, one of the first trigger points is that there has to be 70% minimum capacity or ability for police officers, patrol officers, police officers for on the streets. So it's not automatic. But it recognizes that at that point in time, we can formalize, we can activate a group and combine the forces of the law enforcement entities that exist within the government of Guam to be able to band together to go after the drug traffickers. And, with regard to the concern about whether or not, we should include other non-law enforcement entities that are just as important, when you want to be able to, for lack of a better term, fight this war. There's the rehabilitation, the recovery, and basically the prevention side of the house to this equation. And I appreciate that in this bill it recognizes and it provides the opportunity for their membership, for their inclusion in discussions when it is necessary. And it's there. But most importantly, it codifies a task force that will also provide other opportunities, such as one with the Drug Enforcement Administration. They have this program called High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas, HIDA. A few years ago, there was an attempt to be able to apply for that program, and it had specific criteria necessary. And one of that criteria was a commitment by the affected area to provide the resources necessary to carry out this program. And what this bill will do, will codify a group so that it meets that criteria, and we can get the additional support for this. Again, at a time when, we've got to muster the resources together. We got to bring in the different, components from the different law enforcement entities just to be able to make up what we once had as the norm in the drug enforcement area. So, will this effort work? It's one of the best attempts and one of the greatest ways we can do this. The proof's in the pudding. But I think in making this pudding and putting this together, putting these ingredients together, we're going to have a better effort at being able to combat this problem that we have right now with drugs on our island. And again, it's mustering these resources and giving them that ability and codifying it and opening up the opportunities for a greater effort to be able to deal with this drug problem that we have. So with that, Madam Chair, I stand in full support of this bill. Not just from a policy standpoint, but from an experience standpoint. I know what it's like to be in that war. I came from it. I know what it's like, and I can appreciate the times when we were able to work together collaboratively with other law enforcement entities. It works. And based on experience, knowing that it works, I know this will work. And this will be a great day and a great effort to be able to finally get ahead of this problem and hopefully nip it in its bud, okay, and knock it out of our island. So with that, Madam Chair, Thank you very much, and I ask my colleagues for their support as well.
Jesus Massey, Senator, on the bill. Is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the bill? Senator Taitagui, you're recognized.
Sidus Massey, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this measure, especially to speak out about our epidemic that we have on Guam. The hugest, I mean, it's bigger than, actually, if you think about it, it's bigger than diabetes on this island. We have a huge problem. And time again, we all stand up here and talk about it. We give statistics and data that everybody knows there's a huge problem. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure every one of us in this body has had a run-in with a family member, a relative, a friend who's addicted to either ice, methamphetamine, and now fentanyl. So if it's up to us to see what we can do to curb this epidemic on this island. But when I looked at this legislation, Madam Speaker, I asked myself, well, what does this bill do to really address the epidemic that we can't do already? So I looked at the measure. When I first saw the bill, I looked at it and I thought, well, this kind of is, I think this is inorganic because we don't have the authority to tell the governor, what to do with her agencies. We can put programs in, but ultimately, the governor has the ability to put a task force together, to put her agencies together, to create this. This group of individuals that come together and meet in case that we don't meet a certain quota of police officers that are on the street. Instead, we're creating a task force that's going to give a job to 2 administrators, a couple other individuals who will be in this task force group to give out reports and let this body and the governor know what's going on. So we're creating some more jobs for someone. And in the meantime, when this task force is activated, it's going to pull law enforcement from other areas that are protecting, one, the port, one of the biggest areas of drugs coming through to this island. We're going to take away from the port. We're going to take away from airport. We're going to take away from parks if we can't meet that quota. So who's going to keep an eye on those areas? Instead, we're going to spend over $500,000 annually for this task force. When the governor herself can put together this group of individuals, these areas that which she oversees, to combat whatever needs to be done. Because right now there's a task force, again, the OCDF, under the U.S. Attorney General's office, which is called, the OCDF is called Organized Criminal Drug Task Force. That's in place right now federally. And it invites individuals from our local government to be a part of. So what is the main issue that we're having on this island is a lack of police officers. This bill is not going to bring more police officers onto the street. It's going to take away from other areas that we have to protect. We need to be putting funding into our police officers and pay them a salary which they don't leave to go pay to a better job in the federal side. So they don't leave this island to go work in the United States or somewhere else. Leave island because they can't make a decent living here. That's how we're supposed to address the shortage of police officers here. We have several task forces that are put in place for police officers. So let's not be mistaken about this legislation. A task force put together to address the drug problem on Guam, when all it does is take away police officers from other areas that need to be protected. And let's throw $500,000 annually to pay for 2 administrators and a couple other office staff people to come in. This administration should have addressed this as soon, and they didn't get rid of the Mandania task force, according to the police, our chief. To them, it's still operating, but it's an investigation type of task force. So they can keep these things going. What, we're legislating it? Now we're legislating, telling the governor that she has to use her agencies, put them together, and then take other police officers from other areas. I mean, we saw that during COVID, didn't we? We sure did. It didn't take legislation. Now we're going to have to need another legislation to cover the areas that we're taking police officers from, in parks, in port, at the airport, areas in which the drugs are coming from. Now, from what I gather, and I'm hearing that, the administration wants this bill. There was talk, I heard. And this is someone telling me that, between the author and the governor, we're talking about getting this bill through. I wonder why, I wonder why. When she could have done this herself a long time ago, like 6 years ago, because every year it gets worse on this island, everywhere in the region. Hawaii, even Hawaii is not Hawaii anymore. It's just a plague of people walking like zombies in the street because of drugs. We need to be smarter when creating legislation that really is going to make a difference. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
This is Masi. Senator Taitzkui. On the bill, is there anyone who'd like to speak on the bill? Senator Barnett, on the bill, you're recognized.
Sijos Masi, Madam Speaker. Interesting position I'm in as the second co-sponsor of the bill, but I can explain very clearly why my name is there is because I support the intent of this legislation. Why are we here today? Why are we discussing this bill? Frankly, we're here today because the Leon Guerrero Tenorio administration has failed miserably to address the crystal methamphetamine epidemic. In fact, one of the first things they did when they took office was disband the Mandania Drug Task Force. And they never replaced it with a similar effort or endeavor. And the rest is history. What happened next? We saw the price of meth drop so fast. Retiring speakers have said, oh, it was $1,500 before. When Governor Calvo was in office, it was $800, $900. And then when Lou and Josh got here, it went from $500 a gram to as low as $20 a gram. A lot of big talk from the colleagues in here, and they say they want to stop the drug epidemic. They want to stop the drug dealers. But they don't even have the courage to stand up and stop people who have been dealing drugs and convicted of it from working in the government. Guinea-Gap, just yesterday, we saw colleagues stand up and defend the ability of people who have been implicated in drug smuggling, defend their ability to work for the government. Well, but today we want to do something about it. I support the intent, I support the effort of the good author, because again, he's trying to do something where many of us feel nothing is being done. But just to kind of reiterate what has been done and accomplished in this term of the 37 Guam Legislature, and I get it, this bill is trying to put something where there was something before, right? To help address the void and the absence of efforts from the federal government even, and to put something in place, which is kind of what we've been doing here in the 37 Guam Legislature. We passed my bill that stiffened penalties for meth and fentanyl dealers, and that bill, which is now law, was basically copied and pasted from the federal statute. The bill also talks about the shortage of the police officers, and as the author has said, I think the number is around like 240 police officers or so. So if this bill should pass and be subsequently signed into law, the establishment of Maulik would be immediately triggered, because we don't have 349 police officers on the street. And I tend to agree with the comments of the retiring speaker, and that was my initial thought when the bill was introduced prior to the public hearing, was basically we're going to take from the short to cover the short. Because I think if you go around and you ask all the law enforcement if they have extra bodies, right, and it's a noble intent, really, and I would say, like, DOC definitely doesn't. Let's not take from DOC, because we're looking at a situation right now, the Department of Corrections, where they have one corrections officer supervising 80+ inmates. So we can't take from there. I wouldn't want to take from Customs. As the retiring speaker said, it just doesn't make sense logistically to take from agencies that are mandated their primary responsibility to protect the border. So I think the issues that I have with the bill is logistically, it seems very difficult to implement. And that's why the testimony in the public hearing it basically was like a markup, right? And they went through the bill, and there was a lot of concerns about the bill. Basically what happened in the committee was the chief of police and the director of the Post Commission rewrote the whole thing. And that's what we have here today. And it takes me back to the first election, where the governor had famously remarked, and I think they were running against former Lieutenant Governor Ray Tenorio. I believe the quote was, "We don't need another task force, Ray." Why are we here 6 years later trying to create one? Is because the administration has not done enough, not just in my eyes, many of my colleagues agree, but more importantly, the people out there who are under siege from crystal methamphetamine agree. We had a big hearing at the beginning of the term across the hall where we had some of the very police officers who are tasked with investigating drug trafficking and these kingpins. And let's not kid ourselves, we know who they are. We know who they are. And it is, I don't want to say interesting, but I have heard the Lieutenant Governor, I haven't heard the Governor, but I heard the Lieutenant Governor speak very highly of the bill, and basically saying that it was something that the administration wanted and they would implement. And that's kind of where, you know how it is in here. You try and introduce a bill, and if the administration doesn't want it and it passes, there's just no way they're going to implement it. But with this, it seems like logistically challenging, but it has the support of the administration. And I'm not going to make any accusations about how that support was received, but it does kind of tell you that although some of us might read this and think, how are we going to do this? If the administration thinks it's going to work, obviously, maybe they haven't figured out. But going back to the recruitment and retention, we have done things here to address the recruitment and retention. And although right now we're not at that threshold of the 300 plus officers that our people deserve and need out here protecting us, we're soon approaching it because the administration has implemented the 25% retention pay. And this good body, with the support, the unanimous support of my colleagues, again, thank you, passed the triennial retention bonus, where now if you go and you apply to become a Guam Police Department officer and you are a good cop, you are a clean cop, you receive satisfactory review, and you do your studies, you're going to get a $10,000 bonus every 3 years. And that's one way that we have addressed, and I don't want to say successfully because, you know, we're still growing the legs on that program, and the first bonuses will be issued in 2026. But when I talk to people out there and I tell them, like, hey, go apply to be a police officer, you're going to get this, you're going to get that, you're going to get that, they're excited, which is exactly what Chief Ignacio said the problem was. He said people just aren't interested in becoming police officers anymore, which is what is one of the other, I guess, logistical concerns I had is if you are going to take, for example, an airport police or a port police, and then as the chief said across the hall, all these different officers who are going to augment the Guam Police Department are basically going to have to go through law enforcement training all over again to familiarize themselves with the policies and procedures of the Guam Police Department. And the chief had said that would take anywhere from a month to several months to do. Again, I just, when I look at the bill, and I'm kind of getting this from some of the other colleagues, it's a little confusing as to how it will be executed and whether or not it will be effective. Because one thing that I think, and you know, people have criticisms of the Mandania Drug Task Force, but you know, we have not seen those types of headlines in a while where, you know, millions of dollars of meth seized, and those were the type of things that we were seeing back when Mandania was in effect. But they didn't report to the legislature. They didn't report to the office of the governor. And I think, I don't want to say it's problematic, but if we are going to bring all these great law enforcement minds together to investigate and disrupt the importation of narcotics, I think showing their hand actually goes against what law enforcement investigative techniques, successful ones anyway, should be. Yeah, so it was definitely a contrast to hear Senator Blas, a former policeman, talk about just the sheer number of officers that were dedicated to investigating narcotics, right? And Lana, it's like before the ICE was as bad as it is now, we dedicated so many resources to it, and now that, you know, and I don't think we can win this war. We have lost this war on meth. You know, we have hundreds of kids in foster care whose parents would rather hit that glass pipe than take care of their families. You know, we've lost the war on meth, and now it's just up to us to pick up the pieces. So This would have been great 6 years ago. You know what I mean? But I guess my only hope is if it does pass and the administration has kind of said that they support it and it's something that they're going to make work, then, you know, I hope they make it work, and I hope it doesn't come at a detriment to other areas where we're trying to make headway into challenging the crystal meth. Because, you know, when we talk about where the meth is coming in, right, because we are seeing record seizures at the post office, right? But even with these record seizures, we're not seeing a decrease in the amount of meth on the streets. In fact, we're seeing more zombies out here. We're seeing more crimes being committed. We're seeing more repeat offenders. And that's where it kind of gets gray for me, because, you know, to sit here and state all the challenges and the issues our people are facing, I don't want to be, you know, the one shooting down someone's idea of a solution. And I'm not trying to. I'm just saying that I hope it works. I really do, because I support the intent, and I do think that we need to do something. I'm just not sure if doing this is going to work. Cedros Masi, Madam Chair.
Senator?
Point of information, Madam Speaker, and
Please state your
correction.
point of information, Senator Taitakui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Earlier, I mentioned how the task force, Mandano task force, is still in place. Actually, I stand corrected. The way I was reading the committee report, Madam Speaker, it just said that they dismantled it, but they took, according to Chief Ignacio, that 6 at the Special Investigations Section and 7 at the task force. Was talking about how they dismantled, but they maintain them as investigators. So I stand corrected, Madam Speaker, on that.
Mrs. Masi, for your point of information.
On Bill number 250-37, Speaker Therese, you are recognized on the bill.
Cedros Masi. I totally agree that we have a drug problem on Guam, and that we have to find creative ways to take care of this, to stop it, to remove it from our island. I'm just not clear from the bill exactly what this task force is going to be doing, because it's not clear. It doesn't tell us what is not working that we are trying to fix. Is it their investigation unit needs more people? Do we need people to do raids like that Mandano task force was supposedly doing? Do we need people to stop the drugs at the border like Customs tells us they need over and over? Do we need people on the streets? It looks like this bill is to increase police officers on the streets, which is, in my layperson's view, that's going to go after the users. They're the ones on the streets. Nowhere in the bill do I find the solution to taking care of the dealers. Like, I thought that's the problem we need to solve. That's what we're hoping those federal task force, taking some of our GPD or local law enforcement officers and putting them on these fusion task forces or the fusion center, putting them on the federal task force is supposed to do for us is help us to get the dealers. Help us to stop the drugs from flowing into Guam in the first place. But I just don't see that. What it is, it seems like the bill creates a task force, and this task force is going to be led by the chief of police, and that I agree to. That's a good idea. But it doesn't necessarily say what their goal is or how they are going to do this that they are not able to do now. And that's really, I think, maybe I share the concern with some of the previous speakers. It's like, what are they not able to do now? I really do want to know, what does the police think they need to do that they are not able to do now? And why not? If it is just we need more police officers on the streets, we've known that. We have tried to fund cycles. They have told us they cannot hire despite the funding of the cycles because people do not want to apply for the police department. So we need to take care of that problem. And we have tried, but that is really where we need it. Maybe we need to hire less in certain other agencies if they're not necessary and hire them in GPD. Bring that money back to GPD somehow so that these officers will get paid fairly. And that we're not going to have some highly paid officers from other agencies coming over and doing the same work as a GPD officer but getting paid double the amount or some other amount. I just worry about this and the other parts where nothing in this bill talks about shoring up customs, stopping the importation, which we have talked about so many times. That's the crux of the problem. Cut it off, cut off the business. Or, what is the problem with assigning these officers right now? Why is that not being done? Why did the governor not do that? Did they need a law to do that? I'm not clear about that. Seems to me like the governor is in charge of the executive branch. And we have an emergency. We are able to call on all all agencies of the government of Guam to work together in that emergency. We've seen it many times. We should see it for meth. If we are short, GPD should be assisted right now today. They should have been assisted in the past. I'm just not clear. It wasn't testified to why they were not able to do that. So the bill says GPD has 520 personnel. Well, it says the requirements are 520 personnel, and they must have 364 uniformed officers for shift requirements. And if they don't have that, that's when this bill will kick in. That's when they will get additional officers. But my understanding is that's the situation we have right now, that they do not have 364 uniformed officers for shift requirements. And it says, quote, officers on the beat, comma, officers on the street, unquote. I'm not really sure what that means, because if you're going to, I think if the author would yield, did you say there were 240 current officers on the street for shift requirements?
Senator Duenas, would you like to yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I do yield. And that is an approximate number at this point. I believe that in all of our research and our discussion and the correspondence with GPD while we were constructing and putting this bill together, the range of officers that we had on the beat and on the street was somewhere between 210 to maybe a high of 240 to 245. That was also mentioned during the public hearing. It should be enumerated in the committee report. The manpower requirements are woefully below 50% at this point in time, Madam Chair.
Sejus Masi, the manpower is below 50% of what GPD needs. It's 124 approximate officers below what should be on the streets, according to this bill. So that means 124 officers should be taken from the airport or the port and brought into GPD to bring us up to the number of personnel that this bill says we need on the streets. and that should remain in effect until recommended to cease by the chairman, which is the chief of police, and approved by the co-chairman. And the co-chairmen are the Port Authority and the airport directors. I'll tell you right now, that's a part of this bill I do not agree with. I don't think the port director or the airport director has any business telling GPD what they need, do not need, or being involved like that. If it's a GPD investigation, they're going to operate under GPD's rules, supposedly GPD's intel. I don't know that it should work like that, but there's several places in the bill.
Madam Chair. Point of information. To clarify
Senator
this point.
Duenas, you may proceed with the point of information.
The co-chairs are clearly under membership. The co-chairs are the executive director of the Post Commission and the executive director of the Fusion Center. This decision is not made by the port or the airport in terms of when the decision to cease is. It is made by the co-chairpersons who are, as I just said, the Post Commission as well as the Fusion Center. And I said that in my opening. The reason for that is this is the check and balance in the system in terms of the training arm and the federal arm.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Madam.
Speaker, you may proceed.
Thank you for that point of information. The reason why it's confusing is because, well, then we have now a post-chair commission. The chairman of the post commission is going to tell GPD and, make the decisions on whether we need police officers or not. Fusion Center, I don't know, that one might be closer. It's just not clear to me. We have other provisions in the bill that say that it is the directors and general managers of the airport and the port and the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Parks and Rec who shall identify which peace officers from their agencies will augment the Guam Police Department. And they will determine the number of officers to be assigned to the Guam Police Department. And that's, I guess, where I question why shouldn't that just be GPD's jurisdiction of what is their need? And we all, as an entire government, come to their aid if they are in need. If they are the ones doing the emergency response, I'm all for coming to their aid, but I think it should be definitely directed by them. Otherwise, we'll have in one day some objection by some director or who knows what. It's just that all that discretion is like, I don't understand what that's all for. This is a criminal investigation. There should really be one leader and not any type of impediment from any outside entities. I agree with the parts of the bill that say the chief of police shall deputize other law enforcement officers. Yes. They should be assigned, yes. But I don't think that's the core. And then there are other recommendations that were actually made by the police department that conflict with the bill. For example, this reporting requirement. So it says that the bill says they shall submit a report on their activities within 31 calendar days after the activation of the task force. And then in another provision of the bill, it says the chief and the directors and general managers shall meet within 31 days of this act to determine the peace officers. I don't know. And in the police department's testimony, they said 31 days is too soon for a report on the group's activities and achievements. We ask that any report not be required for submission in less than 90 days. So it looks to me like they need to meet in 31 days, and a report, it's just not clear what they will be reporting on in 31 days, if that's what you call the activation of the task force. And then it says, it kind of hints that there will be one report. I'm not sure if this is meant to be multiple reports. It says, in one part, it's going to submit reports on its activities and achievements, and then it shall submit its report no later than 31 days after the activation of the task force. It sounds like a one-time thing. But maybe those can be resolved with a little bit of more work. But what I'm just not understanding is, if we're trying to stop the drugs, and if that is our number one problem, is this task force going to go after the dealers? Or is this task force, like it says, going to just put more personnel, officers on the street, because GPD is short of officers on the street, which is also good. It's good to do that. I don't think that's going to stop the drugs. It might stop something else. But I don't think it's going to stop the importers, and I don't think it's going to stop the dealers by putting these officers out on the street. I think it seems to me like we need those officers in investigation units, in very complex intelligence units, and the other things that we've seen success with. And there was a recommendation during the public hearing that we need a drug prosecutor to be part of this, so that these police officers will, as they go along, be equipped with legal advice from a prosecutor to move when they need to move. But if I'm reading it correctly, that was removed from membership on this task force. Maybe I'll just ask the author if he would yield. Is that correct? The AG is no longer a member on the task force?
Senator Duenas, would you like to yield?
Cedros Masi, yes, I'd like to yield to that. So, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the determination was made that as an independent body, the Attorney General's office, and the fact that they take the information that is given from, of course, any law enforcement entity that sends it up for their disposition and implementation, it would be a conflict. In fact, my conversation with the Attorney General was, we can work on that as the task force makes recommendations, and they are committed to also having a dedicated prosecutor. The reason for that, and the discussion that you can see in the committee report, was many officers had said that in the past, when there was a dedicated prosecutor, the cases were much better. The prosecution was much better because they didn't have to, the individual that was doing the prosecution as a dedicated prosecutor was very familiar and had a great working relationship with law enforcement. But there has to be that wall between the two, and so we can't codify that into law in terms of the obligations of the Attorney General's office, but that would be the communications coming from the task force to do that, and we can do that in the budgetary process as well to assist, but we cannot put that in the responsibility in this bill in law, because that is an independent arm for prosecution. Cedros Masi.
Cedros Masi for the sponsor for yielding to that question. I'm just reading Chief Ignacio's testimony where he talks about that's what they would like. That's ideal because they need warrants on an ongoing basis and they need immediate response. And then the former chief of police, Fred Berdalio, also spoke about his involvement in the Violent Street Crimes Task Force and how they are also setting up a strategic threat intelligence unit, special operations team to share criminal intelligence. We have our fusion center. So I have no objection to all these efforts. My issue is, after all these years, what are their issues with these efforts, and why are we not solving those issues? Why are we not getting to the root of the problem? What is the lack of cooperation from the other agencies? Why do they have to be involved in whether the chief of police needs them or not? If he needs them, why aren't they sending members over there? And how are we going to stop the dealers with this task force? It's just like the threshold for it, I mean, and there's another provision, let me just get to this before my time runs out, where it says, the chief of police recommended that we take out the words officers on the beat, officers on the street, if they can't maintain manning requirement, and just say that GPD having less than 364 uniformed officers for shift requirements, or at times when needed at the discretion of department agency heads. Again, I don't know why the department agencies heads have that discretion. I think if I'm a department head, I would say, no, I need my people here. Of course, that's why I hire them. That's why in my budget, I find them necessary, and we are manning the airport with these people. Otherwise, they're not necessary, and I need them to go to GPD. I mean, I don't know, that's like a circular thing, and I just say, if GPD needs officers, then the government of Guam has to make a decision, give them. And I know that's what this bill is trying to do in one way, but in another way, it gives that discretion back to these agencies, which we have right now. We're back to square one, where the agencies control law enforcement officers and GPD does not. And GPD is understaffed, underfunded, paid probably, and we're not going after the dealers. Or, I mean, you know, this is such a complex issue, but I just think if we're gonna set up a task force, then let's at least make it their job to go after the dealers. Let's do that. I mean, that's what we want. Or to stop the importation and let them man up customs. Customs comes in here and tells us they still don't have enough, even with the funded recruits that we have given them, still not enough. So those are my concerns with the bill. Although I support any intent that's going to help drugs, we really need to be focused and show what is our success and what are our errors and how we are going to solve the impediments that we have to this law enforcement. Jesus Masi.
You're very welcome, Speaker Chalahi. Anyone else on the main motion? Senator Will Parkinson, I will recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I think about the scourge of drugs on the island, I think back to an event that just happened recently in my own life. This year, I got to celebrate my 20-year high school graduation. Got to see people that I grew up with, people I care about, who I've rooted for from a distance for decades. Got to share and catch up with them. And among that group of friends, you know, there was a little subgroup that I got to hang out with again. That was my kindergarten class. You know, we all went out and had a nice brunch together. We shared some of our old pictures, and I found myself filled with two emotions as I was going through that time. One was compassion and sadness, because I saw that some of the people that I were not seeing at my reunion were people who we'd lost through the drug trade, whether they were incarcerated or lost through fentanyl. There were many people I didn't see at these reunions. And I felt compassion for them because I see some of them still around. And I hope that they can get the help that they need, that the resources are there to help them. And that's one of the things I appreciate about this task force is there's an aim towards compassion, to helping people who are users of drugs, because at the end of the day, they're victims too. They're victims to the people who push these drugs onto our communities. And so we need to have that compassion. And then the other emotion I felt was anger and wrath. I wanted to take down every one of these single scumbags that poisoned our community, poisoned my friends, took away their bright lives, threatening to take away the lives of our future generations. And because of this compassion and this anger I feel about what the drug trade has done to our island, I support this bill. And I'm not just a Johnny-come-lately supporter of this bill. I've been a supporter of this bill from the very beginning, despite not being a co-signer. And that's because when I first saw this bill come out, the first thing I did was I introduced legislation to try and find the funding source for this bill. I believe it was Bill 251-37, money to earmark $11.5 million to help get this agency started, to help get this program started, because that's how seriously I think we should take this problem, that we should put our money where our mouth is and put real resources behind it. Let the people feel our compassion as we go into the communities and offer them ways to rehabilitate. And let the dealers feel our anger and our wrath as we put our resources together to take them down. Now, I know we haven't always had the best positive history with task force in the past. And I used to work in a task force back in the day, in a different field, when I was a firefighter. And the thing I learned about task force is they put you in a task force to solve a problem other people couldn't solve. So when we ask questions like, how is this task force going to solve this problem? Well, that's kind of the point of the task force. We wouldn't be having a task force if we had that answer. We've come to a point now where we have to put our best and our brightest from multiple agencies working together, putting their heads together to solve this scourge as a community. Separated by agencies, things could be lost through the cracks as these individual agencies act as fiefdoms with information and resources not available to other agencies. By having them in a task force, we open the possibility for cooperation and a sharing of information and resources. I too have questions and ambivalence for how all this works because I myself am not a law enforcement professional. But one of my colleagues was in law enforcement and he speaks very highly about this bill. And the other gentleman, the primary sponsor, is a good friend of mine who I've worked with this term. And very many times I've stood shoulder to shoulder with him, looked him in the eye, saw into his heart, felt where his soul was at for the people of this island, and he wants to help. So, I don't know if this bill will solve this problem, if this task force can do it, if anybody can. But the people have spoken this last election and they had a mandate for change. And if the incoming speaker and the incoming budget chair at the head of a new majority say this is the direction they want to go to help take care of our island, I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm going to cooperate and do my part to make sure that the scourge of drugs is wiped off our island. And if this is the direction that our incoming colleagues want to go to solve this problem, I commend them for coming up with a solution, and I will support it. So thank you for coming up with your ideas. Thank you for not giving up on our community. I will never give up on our community, and so I appreciate this legislation that shows compassion to our people, but let's loose our anger onto these animals that would poison our communities, that would poison our friends, our family, the schools that we live in, the bus stops where our children frequent. I grew up in Guam, where I could walk the roads alone. And I learned the only skill I needed to survive was how to pick up rocks to scare away stray dogs. The lessons our children need to learn to survive are far heavier and far darker when they should be much lighter. And so I stand in full support of this legislation, and I commend the good author for his efforts, and I ask, too, to be added as a co-sponsor to this measure. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, is there anyone else who would like to speak? If not, then the sponsor may close on the bill.
Massey, Madam Chair. And I want to say thank you, and I appreciate the very spirited debate on this bill. But I want to start by thanking my good friend, and as my other good friend said, the incoming speaker, for providing me with a piece of information, Madam Speaker, that is contained in the designation of the high-intensity drug trafficking areas, which only 33 states have right now. Guam applied and Guam was denied. We tried to piggyback on Hawaii. We were denied. Another good friend of mine, Jim McDonald, who has been trying to move this effort forward as well, former Customs Director, fully supports this bill, mentioned that one of the problems that we had was the coordination, the local coordination. And it says very clearly here, and I'm glad he brought it to our attention, to qualify for consideration under HIDA, areas must meet the following criteria. I just want to go to the one that stands out and one of the issues we had with our application, Madam Speaker. State, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies have committed resources to respond to the drug trafficking problem in the area, thereby indicating a determination to respond aggressively to the problem. This is one of the 5 pillars of getting approved for this massive funding source and ability to augment the operations of what we're trying to accomplish here. Madam Speaker, one of the concerns I heard was, Governor can do this. You're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, just to make sure that I wasn't stepping on any toes, I wanted to reiterate in the bill that the task force shall operate in accordance with the authority vested in the Governor of Guam, as outlined in Section 1422 of the Organic Act of Guam. Absolutely, no question. And we say she about the governor. This is not for this governor only. Last I checked, Madam Speaker, we are the policy-setting body of our government. We set policy. We set policy a lot of times when we see that there's a lack of policy. I was elated that the chief of police, yes, would come down and help rewrite the bill. I've seen many bills on this floor from many authors get rewritten. That's why we do this. First, second, third reading, voting file. That's the construction of this body. But after having put all their input in and put their full weight and support behind this, I do remember, and I had a call with the chief of police today on another matter, and he said, I've been tracking Maulik, and I hope it passes in this term, Chris. And I said, well, we're going to debate it today, Chief, and I hope so too. And he reiterated that. He said, I love the fact that we're going to codify this because it's not at the whim. It's a law. Madam Speaker, I understand your concern, but I just think that the concern that was brought up, maybe it's just not quite understood. Yes, officers on the beat and officers on the street are designed to enforce our laws. And yes, arrest people who are using drugs. They're doing it right now. Almost every traffic pullover, or even cars just sitting in parking lots, loitering, almost 100% find methamphetamine, firearms, money, small dealers in those vehicles. You know, in law enforcement, Madam Speaker, yeah, I'm not a law enforcement guy, but maybe I watch too much cop shows on TV. But it is a lot of times the little guys that get you to the big fish. Enforcement. But the design of this is to say when you cannot meet those manpower requirements, you must have this task force. Now I go back to the 6 or 7 federal officers that at any given time under this law, the chief is in agreement with, that he can pull when he needs. They said, Madam Speaker, and I sympathize, because I know many in this body are chairs of other agencies which have law enforcement people. The chief said straight out to us, and even the chief of DOC said, I don't know how many guys I'm going to be able to give up to this. Maybe 1, maybe 2. But when you take all of those entities, and if you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you have the 7 pulled from the federal task force, just like my good friend, once again, former decorated police officer said, maybe CID now is the 18, 20, 22 people strong to outfit this task force. There is no way that any of these agencies in good conscience are going to deplete the mission of their job at DOC, at the airport, at the port, and eviscerate their manpower to do this. That's not what's going to happen, Madam Speaker. But there is much more that's involved. As Senator Parkinson said, with a task force. They utilize resources in unique ways. Even just under that deputization. One of the features that we had that I really enjoyed, when even prior to Maulik going in, is when we had another bill by Jesse Lujan to bring the pay scales in coordination up at the airport, was the fire chief there came down and said, or along with the police chief, there was actually one time where an airport police went out of jurisdiction and effectuated an arrest. And that case held up in our district court. Imagine the deputization. They don't have to physically be sitting there to the chief and say, Chief, say sick 'em and I'll go do it. They're smarter. They're more ambidextrous than that. But they have a law to account to. Madam Speaker, I want to appreciate Senator Parkinson because it was true. At the discussion about Maulik and the unfortunate situation that we endured when that guest from Korea lost his life. It was then president of GVB that activated and got more officers and worked within his organization to get yellow shirts out there in Tuman. That was the bill that Senator Parkinson put in, said, let's go fund that. But then called me up a couple days later and said, hey, you know what? If we give that money to Maulik, I bet you we'll even have a bigger bang for the buck. So GVB's been doing this. I'm so proud to have Senator Peter Talahi's son, who is now the chief of operations up there at Parks and Rec, loves this bill. Can't wait till it goes into place. Because they are already doing Maulik in the community. They are patrolling parks. They got more cars. They got more officers. Their officers smile now because they're not one or two of them trying to figure out what to do. Madam Speaker, I'm going to run out of time, and probably a good thing. So before I close, I got two things to do here. One is as the bill was uploaded, there was some technical issues with the numbering, so please bear with me. I need to proffer this. So at this time, I'm going to make a motion to amend the table of contents to remove section 9104 and 94107 and allow legal to renumber the paragraphs. So anyways, that is just a technical issue, and even the Committee of Jurisdiction understands that as it got uploaded and how it got uploaded. So I make that proposed change, and for legal to make technical amendments at this time, Madam Chair.
On the numbering of the chapter, the table of contents, you're saying?
Yes, yes, Madam Speaker.
All right, on that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, that motion carries.
And lastly, Madam Speaker, I want to thank those who spoke in favor, and I want to add Vice Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes as a co-sponsor, as well as Senator Will Parkinson.
On the motion to add co-sponsors, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, that motion carries.
Madam Speaker, I seek the support of my colleagues, and I pray that this bill will be passed into law, or passed by this body and signed into law.
On the motion to place bill.
This time, Madam Speaker, I make a motion to place Bill 250-37 in third reading file for voting.
On the motion to place Bill 250-37 LS as amended by the committee and further amended on the floor to the third reading, is there any objection? There's an objection. All in favor, please raise your hand. I count 4, motion fails. We are now on bill number 332-37 COR. Senator Parkinson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to make a motion to move bill number 332-37 to the third reading file, and I would like to discuss.
Please proceed.
Hafaday, esteemed colleagues. Today I present bill number 332-37 COR, legislation designed to advance Guam's energy independence, resilience, and sustainability. This bill seeks to amend key section of the Guam Code annotated to enhance and expand the Solar Virtual Power Plant Program, which was first enacted by the 36th Guam Legislature but has yet to be fully implemented. Guam continues to face challenges like volatile oil prices, rising energy costs, and the urgent need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. The amendments proposed in this bill represent an opportunity to harness cutting-edge technology to transform our energy grid into a cleaner, more affordable, and reliable system. The Guam Power Authority has strongly supported this measure, as outlined in their testimony. GPA is already on the path to provide 50% of Guam's electricity from renewable sources by 2030. And 100% by 2040. Through strategic partnerships and innovative projects, GPA is driving a clean energy transition that will stabilize energy costs, reduce fuel imports by 1.17 million barrels annually, and cut harmful emissions, including a 99% reduction in sulfur dioxide, all by 2026. This bill will further support GPA's goals by addressing current limitation in the virtual power plant program. By removing restrictions that installations must be on rooftops, the program will now include underutilized spaces like carports, capped landfills, and community solar gardens. Additionally, by enabling participation from non-resident developers and local nonprofits, we can foster competition, access federal grants and tax credits, and lower the cost of renewable energy. The amendments will allow for the integration of emerging technologies such as vehicle-to-grid systems, ensuring that Guam's energy network is not only sustainable, but also adaptable to future demands. This flexibility is essential to improving grid stability and addressing energy supply challenges. This bill is about securing an energy future for our people, one that prioritizes affordability, environmental stewardship, and innovation. GPA has emphasized that the solar virtual power plant will complement existing utility-scale renewable energy projects, helping us to achieve these goals sooner and with greater impact. Colleagues, I urge you to please support Bill number 332-37 to empower our island to achieve energy independence and sustainability. Thank you very much. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator. On Bill 332, is there anyone who'd like to be recognized? Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'll be short on this. I just moved to rise in support of Bill 332-37, which literally expands GPA's virtual power plant, which is the solar program, to include land-based solar systems, and remove the requirement that eligible businesses be owned by a Guam resident. The why for me in this is to expand eligibility in a program that can save residents money on their own power bills. And I know that the BBMR fiscal report said there would be no impact on government funds as a result of this bill, and that the effective date on this would be when enacted into law. So I don't have a problem with this one, and I just support the efforts, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. On the bill, is there anyone else who'd like to speak on the bill? Senator Blas, Minority Leader, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, I support the intent of Bill 332-37. I just have one question that the author can yield to, and that question is relative to the changes that were made on page 2, lines 7 through 9. If he can expound a little bit on, first off, why it was struck out that it's owned and operated by a legal resident, and then included, or a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered to do business in Guam or consortium, including any of the two such organizations. I'm not against it, I just need a little bit more clarification on this, if he's able to provide it.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, I'd be happy to yield. Thank you for that question, sir. The reason the changes in the amendments were made was to access greater access to pools of money out there available in the world, not just in the United States, but through various nonprofits and non-resident. There's the solar industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry growing worldwide, and if there is interest in outside investors to invest in Guam, I want to let people know that there is room for people to invest in solar in Guam. And if you want to invest in Guam, please bring it over here, whether it be through a nonprofit or somebody who wants to stake a claim with solar. Because frankly, even though I would love for all this to be 100% local, our population just frankly doesn't support, there's just not enough people to be taking advantage of it if we don't open it up.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the response. Again, that was just not so much a concern, but a need for clarification on that. I appreciate it. So with that, thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, Senator Taitui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I just take a 1 minute recess?
Sure,
Go
1 minute recess. We're back from recess. Senator Taitzagui, you had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for that short recess. I just wanted to clarify that, we're not putting out the government of Guam from being able to, provide any kind of selling of solar energy. And as we know, there's some legislation that was out to provide the ability for Chamorro Land Trust, especially Chamorro Land Trust, to be able to utilize their land. But that would not be at a development point perspective. It's more of a host, for a solar host. And in the legislation, it does mention that they are a solar host. I do have concerns, though, as I mentioned. I think I was the only one there at the public hearing that we had on this legislation regarding to ensure that our local community has, has a hand up on being able to provide any kind of, well, not any kind, but to be able to have first dubs on a contract, or at least have more merit because they are local. But the change in this bill that required it to be business on Guam, that they're registered on Guam to do business was, I guess it puts out a fair competition, and there are government rules and regs regarding contracts to be given, like the GCC and UOG. What they do is they look to see if it's women-owned business, nonprofit. They look to see if they're a company that's been established on Guam, a local company. And so there are mechanisms in place on the question I had asked to have that first, not first, but more of a merit, higher merit or grading when deciding on contracts on Guam. I just don't want to see our local people losing out, those who wanted to stay home on Guam and not leave our island and build their businesses here, where they're from, where they live, where they grew up. And I don't want them to lose the opportunity for them on this island. I mean, you have big companies coming into this island and, more money, and sometimes taking away opportunities of our local people. So I just wanted to make sure that there is an equal playing field, but then a little bit of an advantage for our local community. So I think, I think a lot of it was addressed, and I know that with solar power, GPA was there to testify in favor of it because they have a requirement by 2030 to come up to a certain percentage of power on this island, and then by 2040 to go fully 100% renewable energy. So I can see the rush into this, that GPA is kind of concerned because there's not enough to meet the demand of legislation that was passed in the 35th Guam Legislature. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized? Vice. Senator Parrish, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm all in support of getting off fossil fuels. I think that's the direction that Guam needs to go to become, I guess we have a mandate to also to reach renewable energy by 2040, so 100% renewable energy. And GPA came out in support of this bill. I know there was a lot of talk in the previous legislature regarding the virtual power plant program where this bill was passed. And the idea of it really, utilizing our rooftops as an area to collect light energy and convert it to electricity. That is a good thing because, to have to I guess, consolidated area, the issue of having a consolidated area is that when you had cloud cover in that area, then it really reduces the amount of electricity that can be generated. But if you have distributed collection process for light energy, then you really can kind of compensate for a cloud cover in one area. So yeah, it does make sense to promote policies in that regard. I guess the important thing is that GPA is looking at this very closely to ensure that there's not going to be huge fluctuations, which would mean protecting the infrastructure that exists, as well as the infrastructure of everybody on the island that depends upon the electricity that GPA produces. I guess the question that I have regarding this, so there was the testimony that was provided in regards to recommended language to limit, so it states, we do recommend including language to limit the property eligible for the solar virtual power plant to property covered by the customer's meter. Limiting the program to connected properties enables easier monitoring and accountability of energy production and consumption, simplifying the resolution of any issues that may arise. It also helps maintain the financial viability of the program by ensuring that the energy produced can be reliably allocated and compensated based on the actual consumption of the participating customers. And so in the bill, I don't see any amendments, so perhaps this is a question to the sponsor of the bill. Was this addressed, and if it's possible to address this concern?
Senator Parkinson, would you like to yield?
At this time, may I ask for a moment's recess to confer?
Moment's recess. Yamina Trentai Shetina Leslatu Guan is back from recess. Senator Parkinson, would you like to yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker. When we were drafting this legislation, one of the things that we were really trying to prioritize in the legislation was community solar gardens. And so what community solar gardens are, for the people watching, is that instead of having rooftop solar on any individual home, a solar garden would be like multiple homes having a shared area where they have a solar panel set up that feeds all of those homes. And so language limited to their meter would basically cancel out the ability for community solar gardens. So we opted not to include that language and perhaps have that be addressed with a potential follow-up bill if it becomes such an issue.
Senator, does that suffice?
Yes, and thank you for that response. That sounds like a great plan to have a shared resource. But I guess the question is, yeah, what is the impact to GPA if that's, I mean, that's ideal, but I'm wondering what the impact to GPA would be if this amendment was actually what they recommended. Yeah, so I guess that's a question that I'm
So
trying to
that's
reach
an
out to GPA
increase.
for at this time. And if maybe the sponsor of the bill would know that the answer to that question.
Senator Will, would you like the question repeated, or would you like to yield?
Sure, I'll yield to the question. From my conversations with GPA, the way I understand it, that this is not something that is super common, but it may be, this is more of an amendment for corner cases, for really rural areas, for places that are way out of the way, but it's probably not going to be a common problem that they run into. So in terms of the impact to GPA, I would think it's either some sort of inconvenience on their part to accommodate a more rural location, or just an inability, or it just leads to them being unable to service that particular customer for that need. But in terms of any stresses beyond that, I don't think has any other impacts on GPA beyond beyond the few limited cases.
Thank you, Senator Parkinson. Senator Sabina, does that suffice? You may proceed.
Yeah, I would like, it doesn't suffice actually, because without having heard from GPA, I don't know if that, yeah, it doesn't suffice. But the other question I have is in section 8602, it's actually the same question that one of my colleagues asked earlier about the strikeout of owned and operated by a legal resident of Guam. I think, it's important to maybe instead of striking it out, but to have options. I think what's critical, though, with any kind of solar development business is that they're registered to do business on Guam. And maybe that's perhaps an amendment that I would like to proffer in place, I guess, as a safeguard with that strikeout.
So you asking the inquiry first, or do you want to work on the
Yeah, I think I would
amendment?
like to work on that amendment. And I guess the other thing, too, a question about that subsection is the 501c3, there are other types of nonprofits. Maybe if the sponsor of the bill can explain why is that specifically outlined in this bill.
I'm going to go ahead and ask Senator Parkinson if he'd like to yield, and then probably take a moment's recess to entertain your possible amendment. Senator Will, would you like to yield? Would you like to yield, Senator Will?
Yeah, could I have a repeat of the question, please?
Senator Parrish, can you please repeat the question?
Sure. The question that I asked is why specifically a 501c3 versus, because nonprofits, there's other types of nonprofits, and the question is why specifically that?
My understanding is that there is availability of federal funds specifically for nonprofits, and that the way we had written that before, those nonprofits were not able to avail of those federal funds because of the way we restricted the language.
Thank you. Senator Parrish, you have the floor.
Okay, so I see the advantage of it, but by doing that, we're also prohibiting other nonprofits. So I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to maybe expand the language so it's not, I guess, in a way considered restrictive.
Yes, Senator Parrish, I'm going to go ahead and take a moment's recess on this so that I can further relate to the inquiry that's being said. A moment's recess. The 37th Guam Legislature is back from recess. Senator Parrish, you can go ahead and.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the sponsor of the bill for entertaining my questions. I would like to proffer amendment, but I would like to yield the time while I work on the amendments to another member of the body if they would like to speak on this question.
Thank you, Senator Parrish, for that consideration. Anybody else wishing to speak on the main motion? Is there anybody else wishing to speak? Speaker Therese, I'll go ahead and allow you at this time while Senator Parrish is working on her proposed amendment. Please proceed.
Situs Masi. I share similar questions about the bill, and this is based on GPA's testimony, which was generally in support of the bill, but they did make some very specific remarks, including amendments that they thought needed to happen. They said they recommended including language to limit the property eligible for solar virtual power plant to property covered by customer's meter. Limiting that will help maintain the financial viability of the program, ensuring energy produced can be reliably allocated and compensated based on the actual consumption of the participating customers. But it does not look like that amendment was made. The bill's not been amended after the public hearing, so it did not include GPA's amendment. And so that doesn't make sense to me. And so I think it's not correct to say GPA completely supports this bill if they were supporting it based on a proposed amendment. The other thing is that, as the previous speaker said, the GPA was very clear that We can allow nonprofits that would increase the pool, and we could allow non-resident developers, but that those developers will need to be licensed to do business in Guam and subcontract to Guam-based companies. And I feel like by deleting the language in page 2, subsection D, where it says that is owned and operated by a legal resident of Guam, and not putting anything in there, such as GPA is suggesting, we are just saying all off-island developers without any of these conditions that GPA specified. So I don't agree to that. I think that the bill should be amended to fix those things. But what I wanted to point out is I've also tried to look through this to see, you know, what is the long-term effect and they're hoping that this is going to result in lower power purchase agreement prices for energy by allowing better competition. So hopefully that will result in, it doesn't say it in this testimony, but I'm hoping that the whole point of it is to reduce prices for consumers if they are getting lower prices for the energy at the GPA side, but they do not promise that. And the reason why I bring that up is because of my concern over the recent news at GPA and GWA, CCU, where we put in, the legislature, we put in power credits, $100 a month, power credits for so many families. I think it totaled about $142 million worth plus of power credits, $142 million of power credits. This is to subsidize what consumers were paying to GPA for power, supposedly based because GPA could not control the fuel prices and the fuel prices kept going up. But not too long ago, we get the news that in May, the CCU increased all the GPA employees' pay, which I really don't oppose. These are meager increases if you compare them to the rest of the government of Guam that got 22% increases perhaps. But that was 16.8 million total increases that they said would be paid out of revenues. That means revenues, customer paying revenues, customer fees. Then, in November 2024, and this is really the part that I just want to put on the record, in November 2024, GPA and GWA petitioned CCU, and CCU again approved management increases. And these are where, if you're, I don't know, I think for the average person like me, this was pretty mind-blowing. So we had one go $10,000 raise, another $20,000 raise, another $39,000 raise, another $10,000 raise, another $18,000 raise, another $9,000 raise, and the last one, $17,000 raise. It made me a little bit, concerned is not even the word, maybe sick is a better word, because we use money to subsidize the fees for consumers, and then they turn around and say, well, we have enough revenue to pay all of this management pay scales with these huge pay raises. It's just not making sense to me. Why couldn't they offset the customers' fees with that money? If they had that kind of money, if they have the money necessary to pay these raises, why couldn't they have offset the customer's fees. One of the articles said that to pay the regular or some of the increases, not these management increases, but the other ones, that they would not result in rate increases for customers. Instead, GPA
Objection, Madam
would fund-
Speaker. This has nothing to do with
It
the
very
virtual
much
power plant
has
bill.
to do, and
What
I
is
don't
pay
appreciate
raises?
being
Hold on.
interrupted.
Hold on. Senator Parkinson, Speaker had the floor. Do you have a point of information
Or a point of order.
or a point of order? Please
Yes,
state your
point of order, ma'am. What do pay raises have to do with a virtual power plant bill?
The amount of money that we're paying to GPA and the amount of money savings that we're
Speaker?
going to get from this bill. That's very relevant. It's completely, that's not a point of order.
I'm, again,
If he
Speaker,
doesn't
you have
find it
the floor.
relevant, that's his problem. This is super
Senator
relevant.
on the merit, you still have the floor.
Thank you.
Senator Parkinson,
Maybe that's the
Speaker
problem,
Chalawi
ma'am.
has
Po-
the
Point, point of
Speaker,
inquiry,
is
don't
that-
we have to say about
State your
the
point of
subsi-
inquiry, Senator Parkinson.
Don't we have to talk about the bill? Like, this has nothing to do with the virtual power plants.
Duly noted. Speaker Chalawi, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much. Before I got interrupted, I was saying the whole point of this bill is that this is something good for the people of Guam. This is something that's going to save GPA from, how do they describe it? It's going to save them, or it's going to lower costs for GPA. And so my question is, GPA failed to go further and say where the lowered costs would be applied. Because we think it's going to be applied to the consumers, but maybe it's just going to be applied to increases in salaries. And I think that's very relevant, and we should all pay very close attention to that. Because while we are sacrificing money to be used for other things in Guam so that we can subsidize our consumers, GPA pays $10,000, $20,000, $18,000, $39,000 pay raises to management, and says they're going to fund this through operational efficiencies, such as streamlining workflows and using the smart grid. Well, thank goodness. Why didn't they do that before and save the consumers some money? All of this works together. We cannot look at it one little piece. Oh yeah, let's give GPA some cost savings and then allow them to use it on exorbitant raises while we subsidize consumers. Makes no sense. So I have every right to voice my opinion on that in part of this debate on the legislative floor while we are considering a bill to allow expansion of the who can bid for these projects and delete the words that say businesses that are owned and operated by legal residents of Guam to all businesses around the globe, as the author said. I think it's very relevant. So again, my concern is just that we are not in the big picture. We're not saving the consumers money necessarily. We should be. That was the whole plan of the solar. But really, are we? And if we had the ability to save consumers through operational efficiencies all this while, such as streamlining workflows and using the smart grid, why didn't they do that? And if they intend to fund these increases out of additional revenues, which is what another article says, that means consumer prices. And so I'm concerned about that because I can't see in GPA's testimony, except that the customer whose property that these things are on, they might for sure have a savings, but not necessarily all the other consumers on Guam. But GPA will have a cost savings as well. And so I just think all of that is very relevant. But I would like to make an amendment to this bill. On page 2, subsection D. Don't know, was that passed out?
Subsection what?
Yeah, so one is being passed out. I have 2 amendments. One's being passed out. One, I don't think it was passed out, but it's quite simple. If I could make a motion to just entertain it without it being passed out. Got it?
I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds to the members present here. May I have a copy?
Where's the one you're passing? Madam Speaker, the first one that's been passed, it has been passed out.
Go ahead and proceed and read the amendment, please.
It's to add the words, developer means a licensed solar development business. It should be a comma. The Chamorro Land Trust Commission, comma, and take out the and. It says, and it should read Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, or, and then continuing with the current language of the bill, it says, or a 501c nonprofit organization. And the reason why I'm making this amendment, because while Chamorro Land Trust and ancestral lands might be covered under the solar hosts, the ones who own the property, this developer language is general. It says a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered to do business can be a developer. Doesn't give any other criteria for that. So if they can do it, perhaps these guys can do it too. So I'd like to include them if it's possible. And I'm sure that GPA, if this is not possible, is not going to entertain it, but if it's possible, I would like to give them that opportunity.
So, Madam Speaker, if I may, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fabricate this just so that we can correct what has been presented. You wanted to make sure that after the word business, you're going to put...
After the word business, there should be a comma.
After the word business, there should be a comma? Are there any objections?
There are several amendments, so I'm looking
No,
at the one
I'm
that
just
adds
going to
the-
say, after the word, before you talk about, we're going to do the technical changes right now, because it is going to be significant. So after the word business, we're going to put a comment. Are there any objections?
On the amendment where we add CLTC and ancestral lands, otherwise a comma is not needed.
So can you read that to the First Amendment, please, on the comma?
Yes, the First Amendment is developer means a licensed solar development business, comma, the Chamorro Land
So-
Trust Commission, comma, Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, and then those are my amendments, and then it reads, or a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered to do business in Guam.
On that amendment, are there any objections? You know what? I'm going to go ahead and take a moment's recess so that we can correct this. Imina Trentashetiana Legislature and Guahan is back from recess. Speaker, you still have the floor.
Caesar's Mossy, yeah. If the first copy that was passed out is an error, if we could just please disregard that. So I'd like to move to withdraw that proposed amendment because these ones that are passed out are accurate.
On the motion to withdraw, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Speaker Terlai, you still have the floor.
Thank you. So I'll begin with the one to subsection D that says developer means a solar development business. Wait.
Madam Speaker, can you please read the page and the line?
Yes. Line 7, page 2, subsection D, amending it to read, developer means a solar development business licensed to do business on Guam, the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, or a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered to do business in Guam, or a consortium including any of the two such organizations. This is just to make the language in the bill match what GPA said in their testimony, that while we are opening this up to non-resident developers, they should still be licensed to do business on Guam and subcontract to Guam-based companies. So that's why the language is added, and I'm adding the CLTC and the ancestral lands, and just as the bill has added 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So,
thank you, Madam Speaker. So on the First Amendment on line 7, page 2, anyone wishing to speak? Minority Leader, I will recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, I object to this amendment. First off, you know, the inclusion of the Chamorro Land Trust and the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, and you know, as the developer. Okay, are we now changing the mandate and the enabling legislation for CLTC and Guam Ancestral Lands Commission? Are they now developers in the sense of this? And in the sense of this, now do they come in competition with businesses?
Are you asking that?
No, I'm not asking you. That's my reasoning as to why I object to this. I can see the value of this, you know, with the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission and Chamorro Land Trust Commission, but then now to then characterize them as the developer in this thing. Okay, when you characterize that as a developer, now there becomes a funding source that's necessary for this. Okay, which in the original intent of the bill and the legislation, there was none. So I can see where they can, the value of this on their properties that they manage, but now we have to make them developers. As developers, is that in their enabling legislation? I think not. So therefore, I object to this amendment.
Thank you, Minority Leader. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Speaker, you...
the point of information, yes, or if there's no one else to speak.
You may close.
Oh, all right. Well, point of information, yes, I do believe it is within their mandate at the Ancestral Lands Commission and the Chamorro Land Trust Commission to develop their properties, Madam Speaker, and to engage in business as necessary.
Madam Speaker, I apologize. I'll take that as a point of information. I apologize to Senator Perez. The Sergeant of Arms told me her hand was raised, so I will proceed before you close. Thank you. Speaker, Senator Parrish, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak. I do rise in support of this amendment. I think this is a great way to ensure that, of course, this is an option. It's not, we're not mandating, but how I read this, it's a definition. A definition, a developer means a solar development business licensed to do business at Guam. It allows the Chamorro Land Trust Commission and the Ancestral Lands Commission, or a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered to do business in Guam. So it really expands the definition to include it, but it doesn't mandate it. And I think why this is a good amendment is because I think it's high time that Chamorro Land Trust sees themselves as a developer. If they change that mindset, they can, they can basically, create revenues like this amendment would propose to do, generate enough revenues for the infrastructure that is needed for to help build affordable homes. And so it gives them opportunity to generate revenue. And I'm almost thinking we should also include Department of Education too, because they have a lot of rooftops that could be utilized. In fact, they are included in this part of the law, but to increase their capacity as a developer to, imagine DOE needs money for infrastructure as well to help maintain their schools. And I think it's, it's important that maybe we need to make that paradigm shift as government, as, we're looking to see the revenues dwindle in the government. We need to we need to think outside the box as an entity. So I rise in support of this amendment. Thank you.
So Senator Parrish, are you going to offer an amendment to the amendment or just?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Thank you very much, Senator Parrish. Anyone else on the speaker amendment? If not, Senator Burnett, I will recognize you. Colleagues, it's after 5. Just please proceed.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment. I don't think it warrants any objection, and I do believe that it will provide opportunities for the Chamorro Land Trust and the Ancestral Lands Commission to avail of money-making opportunities relative to solar farms, opportunities that they would actually welcome and not opportunities that we in the legislature are trying to shove down their throats. I also am encouraged by the amendment striking out or allowance for, I think that's the other amendment she has, for businesses that are licensed on Guam to avail of this as well. Madam Speaker, Sujo Swasi.
You're very welcome, Senator Barnett. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Speaker, you may close on the amendment.
Sizu Smasi, and thank you for those who rose in support of this amendment. And I hope to allay the concerns that were raised by pointing out. So the bill is we're expanding by this bill from solar development businesses to 501c3 nonprofit organizations with all kinds of mandates. There's no other criteria for them here. And of course, they're going to have to legally comply with their mandates, just as if we include CLTC and GALC will have to legally comply with its mandates in order to do this. It just puts them all onto an equal playing field. And we're not talking about competition because you're talking about nonprofits here being allowed to compete with solar development off-island businesses. It's just to really level the playing field a little more and to make it more consistent with what GPA has said when they said they should be registered to do business on Guam. We've applied it to the nonprofits. We must apply that to the solar development businesses as well. And that's the only way we should be allowing this exemption or this removal of the owned and operated by a legal resident of Guam, which the sponsor has deleted from our existing law. If we're going to delete that, we have to balance that with, at the very minimum, have them licensed on Guam. GPA asks that they subcontract as well to Guam-based companies. And I think our law will provide for that. But so for right here, adding the words licensed to do business on Guam is consistent with GPA's testimony, and it makes the bill consistent with what we've required for the nonprofit organizations. Adding CLTC and the GALC will just allow them this opportunity, but they must, of course, comply with their mandates. So I ask my colleagues to allow them that if they can comply consistent with their mandates and not to prohibit that.
You're very welcome. On the amendment as proffered by Speaker Terlahi, there has been an objection. Time out. We're going to take a moment's recess. Thirty-seventh Guam Legislature is back from session. There is an objection to this amendment. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Speaker Terlaw, you do have a second amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I find that, unfortunate because it really puts this bill to be applied inconsistently. But the other amendment I'm making, again, this comes from GPA's testimony, word for word. This will be to lines 20 to 22 and on page 1 to 2 and line 1 to 6 on page 2. So on subsection B, it defines solar host. And the bill adds to the definition of solar host, which used to be whose house, commercial building, or government-owned building, they're adding the word land. So they are extremely expanding solar host to include land. I have no objection to that. My amendment is to add a line in here under the definition of solar host that reads, the property eligible for solar virtual power plant or to solar host is limited to the property covered by the customer's meter. And that comes directly from GPA's testimony. And I'm trying to ensure that this bill complies with GPA's testimony, and they said they need that language because it helps maintain the financial viability of the program. It ensures the energy produced can be reliably allocated and compensated based on the actual consumption of the participating customers. So again, if we're doing this to cut GPA's costs, then we need to comply with how GPA thinks the costs are going to be cut. And that is to allow this, but on a limited basis, and this is how they're going to monitor it as well. So we just limited this to property covered by the customer's meter. I hope that fully explains the amendment. And I ask my colleagues for their support.
Thank you, Speaker Therese. On that amendment, does anyone else wishes to speak? Senator Parkinson, you're recognized on the speaker amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The only reason we didn't have the amendment that Speaker Terlahi is proffering now is just because we wanted to leave the option open for community solar gardens. But, legislation is, it's trade-offs. We can't always get everything through. If this is better for GPA and is this better in the longer-term interest for the community, then I'm okay with this compromise. Anything it takes to make this bill the best possible version of the bill, I'm willing to accept. And I appreciate the Speaker for proffering these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Speaker, would you like to close or ask for the vote?
I'll waive closing on this floor amendment.
On that motion, is there any objections to this amendment? Are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Colleagues, it's 5:10 right now. We're going to take a moment's recess. Imina 37 na legislature ng Guam is back from recess. Colleagues, it's after 5. We will go ahead and motion to recess till 9 o'clock Tuesday morning. Monday is a Santa Maria and Cumberland holiday. We are in recess. Si Zeus on Bini DC Hamza Todos.